Good day, I'm Kevin Leaf.
And I'm Laura Plast.
What a story we have for you folks today.
It's a natural phenomenon beyond belief.
Folks, we're not talking about anything as trivial as a major tornado.
Or a mere hurricane.
No, folks, we have no dull or boring catastrophe of nature to report. What we have today astounds the imagination.
Boggles the mind.
We'll have you on the edge of your seats. Shall we tell them, Laura?
Yes, we've uncovered a news story that scientists have been studying for almost 200 years. It affects more organisms worldwide than almost any other.
The impact of the story is astounding. It has to do with the air we breathe,
The food we eat.
the plants we grow.
We're talking about photosynthesis.
It's so exciting.
It's wild and crazy.
It's the news story of the century. For that matter, of all time.
So on with the story, Kevin. Let's tell the viewers all about this amazing event.
Thanks, Laura. Now, as you know, carbon-based compounds, also known as the building blocks and energy stores of life, are assembled by plants through photosynthesis.
Kevin, are these carbon-based compounds you're referring to carbohydrates, such as sugars and starches?
Yes, Laura, sugars and starches are put together by plants in a series of chemical reactions. Through photosynthesis, plants synthesize food using light energy.
Fascinating. So plants actually make their own food from light? How?
That's what we're here to find out. You see, even though photosynthesis is the largest and most important manufacturing process in the world, it is also one of the most complex. Let's start by taking a look at the chemical equation for this process.
Good idea.
We here at Science News always use chemical equations to describe chemical reactions.
That's right, Kevin. Because the equations tell us just about everything we want to know. They describe the reactants, raw materials if you will, and the products, the manufactured goods and byproducts.
The overall equation for photosynthesis tells us that water and carbon dioxide, with the help of sunlight, is converted into oxygen, simple sugars, and water. It's this process that enables all of us to exist.
Yes, indeed. The simple sugars produced by plants provide food for humans and other animals. In fact, photosynthesizing plants are at the heart of most food webs. We couldn't survive without the food that plants make.
I certainly couldn't live without sugar. But what's amazing is food simply comes from sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide.
Talk about a renewable energy source. It's hard to believe that photosynthesis began on Earth 2.33 billion years ago and has been fueling plants and animals all this time. It's as old as the wind.
Speaking of wind, it's those photosynthesizing organisms that caused our atmosphere to accumulate oxygen gas.
Wow! So we really do rely on photosynthesis to survive. It provides us with food to eat and air to breathe.
That's right. Photosynthesis is everywhere the sun is shining, and to make sure it's still going on outside, let's check the weather with Phil Chloro.
Thanks, Kevin. Today's weather calls for all sorts of conditions that support photosynthesis. As we can see up here in the northern United States, pine and oak trees are photosynthesizing. Now, as we come down here to the southwestern U.S., cacti and other desert plants are soaking up the sun and making food. Now, out here in the seas, as you can see, plants photosynthesizing bacteria and protists are converting carbon dioxide and water into usable energy.
Excuse me, Phil. Did you say photosynthesizing bacteria and protistans?
Yes, Laura. Bacteria are microscopic, one-celled organisms, also known as monirins. Now, monera are so tiny, they don't even house a nucleus. Protists are also unicellular, but they do have a nucleus to control the function of a cell. So, a number of protists are capable of animal-like movements.
I see. But these are still very tiny forms of life we're talking about here.
Oh yes, the tiniest.
Even the tiny one-celled organisms are involved in photosynthesis?
Oh, absolutely. These surfing photosynthesizers, bacteria and protists, soak up nearly half of the carbon dioxide that humans release through the burning of fossil fuels and forests.
Amazing! So there must be billions of bacteria and protistans in the sea.
Exactly! Just one cup of seawater holds 24 million cells of just one species.
Incredible! So all the carbon dioxide exhaled by humans and animals and emitted from burning wood and fossil fuels get taken by plants and bacteria and made into oxygen? It makes you wonder what would happen if the oceans weren't filled with these photosynthesizing creatures.
Well, you know, it's hard to say. One prediction is that the excess carbon dioxide would trap the heat from the sun and the Earth would radically heat up. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty scary to me.
Sounds like we're really dependent on photosynthesizing organisms, not just for food, but for the balance they create in nature.
That's correct, Laura. Now let me tell you about the different kinds of organisms that photosynthesize. All over the world and all types of weather, these photosynthetic autotrophs, such as plants, certain protistans, and bacteria, get their energy from the sun. They're called autotrophs because they actually produce their own food by taking carbon and energy directly from the environment. Autotroph means self-nourishing.
So in other words, all plants and organisms on land and in the sea that photosynthesize are called autotrophs because they feed themselves.
Right. And as far as the weather is concerned, there's not much more to say. All over the globe today, just as it's been for years and years and years and years and years, we have enough sunlight for photosynthesis.
That's good news. Thanks for a very informative report, Phil. And now, on ScienceNet, it's time for one of my favorite segments. In Science is here with a musical tribute to our top story, photosynthesis.
Here comes the sun. It's time for fun. Let's check it out and have no doubt. Photosynthesis, it's happening. Photosynthesis, it's the big thing. Take water and carbon dioxide, add sunlight and simply stand aside. Before you know it, it's gone real far and turned to oxygen, sugar and starch. Photosynthesis, it's changing. Photosynthesis, rearranging. Plants all over photosynthesize, big and small, hey, every size. They make their own food, and that's enough for us to call them autotrophs. Photosynthesis, it's making food. Photosynthesis, it's all good. Photosynthesis, in the sea and on land. Photosynthesis, let's give it a hand.
Great job in science! What a super song! You know, Laura, we've already seen that photosynthesis is indeed happening. We know that it is the basis for the food we eat and the air we breathe. We also know that it helps maintain a balance in nature and make it possible for us all to survive. This story is really big, and we barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn about photosynthesis.
That's right, Kevin. For instance, we know that most plants are autotrophs, right?
Right.
But as a human, my energy comes from the food I eat, like plants and other organisms. So that makes me a heterotroph. Heterotrophs do not synthesize their own food. You know, Kevin, it sure feels good to be at the top of the food chain.
Now, Laura, don't think you're so special just because you're a heterotroph. You share that illustrious title with fungi, most bacteria, and many protistans and other animals.
Really? So not all bacteria and protistans are autotrophs?
No, far from it. Most bacteria feed off other organisms.
I see.
Just as fungi feed off other plants and organisms.
So I have something in common with the mushroom. We're both heterotrophs.
Exactly. Well, I understand that Susie Skyview, our traffic reporter, just radioed in. Let's check in with Susie and see what's happening.
Thanks, Kevin.
Susie, can you actually show us some of the photosynthesis going on?
Let me get a bit closer. Still can't see anything. Let's land this thing. Just leafy plants. Better get out the microscope. Now that's better. Here you see all the layers inside the leaf. This outermost layer is called the epidermis. The epidermis is a waterproof coating that helps prevent water loss. Of course, water and oxygen are released from leaves by a process known as transpiration. The release of water and oxygen is controlled through a microscopic opening in the epidermis called a stoma. Stoma is a Greek word that means mouth.
You know, that stoma does look like a little tiny mouth.
That's right, Kevin. The stoma is not only where water and oxygen exit the leaf, it is also where carbon dioxide enters the leaf.
Oh, so the carbon dioxide enters the leaf through the stoma, and the water enters the plant through the root system.
Exactly. The stoma runs through the middle of the leaf called the mesophyll.
Mesophyll? Sounds Greek to me.
It is, Kevin. Meso means middle, and phyll means leaf.
So I'd be Kevin Phil in Greek. I like the sound of that.
I suppose so, Kevin. Anyway, it is here in the mesophyll where most of the photosynthesizing takes place. Let's take a closer look. Ah, yes. Here are the little photosynthetic cells. And here are the chloroplasts, the organelles found in photosynthesizing plants. This is where photosynthesis takes place. Check it out. Talk about traffic. There's a lot of congestion in here. First, there's the stroma, or semi-fluid interior of the chloroplast.
I thought the stroma was a little mouth opening in the epidermis of the leaf.
No, that's the stoma.
That's what I said, stroma.
No, Laura. The stroma and the stoma are two totally different parts. The stoma is the mouth opening in the epidermis of the leaf. We are talking about the stroma. It is the semi-fluid interior of the chloroplast.
Stroma. Stoma. Got it.
Anyway, two membranes surround the stroma. The inner membrane weaves through the stroma and makes flattened discs. The discs make little stacks called grana. All the granum within the stroma of the chloroplast makes up the thylakoid membrane system.
Wow. Let's give our viewers another look at the parts of the chloroplast. These little organelles are incredible.
Okay, here's the interior or stroma. The little stacks of discs are grana. The granum and the channels that connect them make up the thylakoid membrane system. Susie, what happens in here?
I'm sure glad you asked. This is where the first stage of photosynthesis, the light-dependent stage, takes place. The grana and channels store hydrogen ions for ATP production. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is a molecule that carries energy in cells. The stroma is important too. Sugars get assembled there in the second stage, the light-independent stage of photosynthesis.
So what you're saying is photosynthesis has two parts. ATP production in the thylakoid membrane system, then sugars assembly in the stroma.
Thanks, Kevin. The first part, ATP production in the thylakoid membrane system, requires sunlight. That's why we call it light-dependent. The sugar assembly in the stroma does not require sunlight. Therefore, we call it light-independent.
Wow, Susie, you make it sound so simple.
Anything is simple once you understand it. Well, it's time for me to take off. I have to get back to the skies and check out how those heterotrophs are doing driving on the freeway. Back to you, Laura.
Thanks, Susie. Great job. Well, it looks like End Science is ready with another song about our big story, photosynthesis. So let's do it.
Inside the leaf is where it's at, the mesophyll to be exact. Right here is where things really get fast, deep inside the chloroplast.
These granum stacks are really great. They help make adenosine triphosphate. That ATP is all the rage. It's the life-dependent stage.
ATP carries energy in the cell
and makes photosynthesis work so well.
but the stroma is important too.
It's where plants make their sugary glue. Think about how photosynthesis starts. Remember, there are two distinct parts.
One needs light to make energy.
In the thylakoid membrane system, see? The other part works without light, making food like sugar out of sight. The sugar-making stroma doesn't need sun to help make photosynthesis run.
Inside the leaf, that's where it's at.
The mesophyll, to be exact.
That's photosynthesis front and back.
You've got it now, and that's a fact.
We'll be back with more news after this message from our sponsor.
I really wish we didn't have to spend another day out in the sun soaking up nothing but ultraviolet rays.
Yeah, wouldn't it be cool if we could convert energy from the sun into food like photosynthesizing plants?
Oh, sure, we'd be filled with chloroplasts with pigments in them, you know, like chlorophyll.
Then I've got just a cereal you've been wishing for. Chloro Crunchies!
Cool!
Packed with that super duper organelle found in plant cells known as the chloroplast, Chloro Crunchies contains lots of pigments. These chemicals absorb light and trap packets of energy or photons from the sun. Like most green plants, Chloro Crunchies is loaded with the pigment chlorophyll.
No way.
So make Chloro Crunchies part of your breakfast every day. Try it for a snack, lunch, or hey, maybe even dinner.
We're mean green photosynthesis machines, and we love our Chloro Crunchies.
Welcome back to Science News. All the news that really matters. If you just tuned in, our top story today is photosynthesis.
As always, we bring you the stories while they're happening. We just got word from our live correspondent, Johnny Spectrum. He's on the scene and ready to report. Johnny?
Thanks, Laura. I'm here right smack dab in the middle of a sunny day, out in the beautiful sunlight. It's incredible. Just think, billions and billions of cells are engaged in the first stage of photosynthesis right now. In those chloroplasts, specifically the thylakoid membrane system, the light-dependent reactions are proceeding.
Johnny, before you go on, could you quickly review some principles of light that are important?
Sure thing, Kevin. Pigments are molecules that absorb light. They trap packets of energy called photons from the sun. Each pigment absorbs a characteristic wavelength of light. Chlorophyll A is the main pigment found in photosynthesizing organisms. To us, chlorophyll A is green since it transmits green light. Carotenoids, other pigments, are red, orange, and yellow. These pigments are more visible in autumn when many plants stop producing chlorophyll.
That is fascinating. Just by the color of the leaf, we can tell which pigments are predominant. In the summer and spring, it's chlorophyll. In the winter and fall, it's carotenoids.
Carotenoids and other pigments, besides chlorophyll A, absorb energy and transfer it to chlorophyll A.
Johnny, just how do these light-absorbing molecules lead to the production of food?
Well, let's take a close look at those light-dependent reactions. Photosystems, which are clusters of pigments in the thylakoid membrane system, absorb sunlight energy and give up electrons. Electrons are transferred to an acceptor molecule, which donates them to a transport system in the membrane. ATP, the main energy carrier, is formed by one of two different pathways, depending on the plant. The first pathway is called the cyclic pathway. It's easy to describe. It's, well, cyclic. In other words, electrons from photosystem 1, thanks to chlorophyll, cycle through a transport system and back to photosystem 1.
Wait a minute, Johnny. These transport systems in plants, are they like tiny subways or something?
No, Laura, not quite. I guess I better define an electron transport system. It's a sequence of enzymes and other proteins in the cell membrane.
So the enzymes and the proteins pass the electron around like a hot potato.
Right, and as fired up electrons travel through it, energy released by the electrons is used to change ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and an unbound phosphate ion to ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
So, ADP is changed during this cyclic light-dependent reaction to ATP. Interesting.
The second and dominant pathway is cleverly named the non-cyclic pathway. Electrons aren't cycled here. In this pathway, electrons leave the system attached to NADP, a coenzyme that carries 2 electrons and a hydrogen ion. Then electrons from water molecules replace them.
Aha! I was wondering when we were going to get to the water part. I remember the reactants in the photosynthesis equation were carbon dioxide and water.
Exactly, Laura. And here's what happens in a non-cyclic pathway. To begin, the sun's energy is trapped by photosystem 2, which in turn gives up an electron. This triggers photolysis, the cutting of water into oxygen, hydrogen ions, and electrons. The oxygen is given off. The hydrogen ions stay in the thylakoid membrane system, and the rather unexcited electrons replace the excited ones that took off to enter an electron transport system. Energy released in the electron transport system is used to form ATP from ADP and an unbound phosphate. After the electrons leave the first transport system, they end up at photosystem 1. Now remember, these electrons are still hyped up, and photosystem 1 is absorbing photons from the sun.
So it looks like what we have there are some super-duper excited electrons.
Right, Kevin. The electrons get so excited they move off to enter yet another transport system. In this system, the enzyme helper NADP picks up 2 electrons and a hydrogen ion. The new NADPH molecule whisks the hydrogen ion and the 2 electrons to the second stage of photosynthesis, the light-independent reactions.
Thanks, Johnny. The NADPH and ATP molecules Johnny was talking about are required for the next stage of photosynthesis. Coming up, light-independent reactions. But first, let's review. Cyclic pathways only produce ATP. Non-cyclic pathways produce both ATP and NADPH, which are required for the next phase. Therefore, only plants which use non-cyclic pathways produce the necessary molecules to conduct the light-independent reaction.
I think we better summarize the cyclic and non-cyclic pathways in a little more detail.
Okay, here's a comparison between the cyclic and non-cyclic pathways. In the cyclic pathway, sunlight causes electrons to go from photosystem 1 through an electron transport system and back to photosystem 1. Energy released in the electron transport system is used to form ATP.
In the non-cyclic pathway, sunlight causes electrons from photosystem 2 to go through an electron transport system, enter photosystem 1, travel through a second transport system, then wind up in NADPH. Sunlight from photosystem 1 also splits water into oxygen, hydrogen ions, and electrons. ATP is formed from released energy in the first electron transport system.
Wow, that's quite a process. And that's it for the light-dependent reactions. We'll be right back after this with more news, information, and more of today's top story, photosynthesis, right after this.
And now it's time for science poetry. Today's poem is called Photosynthesis Pathways by E. Electron.
Two pathways diverge in woody plants, one cyclic, one not, transporting electron ants. On the cyclic pathway, electrons spin from one photosystem and back to itself again. And within the circle I can see energy released, forming ATP. On the non-cyclic pathway is something new, electrons entering one photosystem and passing through. Onto a second and a change it makes when it turns into NADPH. So what did I do? Which path did I tread? Well, as I am an electron, I was led. I had no choice, I had to try. I took the one less traveled by.
Welcome back to Science News. Next up, sports. And who better to give you today's scores and highlights than our very own JJ Carboni. JJ?
Thanks, Laura. How can we even discuss football, basketball, baseball, or even the Olympic Games with this photosynthesis thing going on?
You've got a point there, JJ.
I mean, photosynthesis is simply amazing. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky, but then again, so are some of the plays I run on the football field. Maybe I can help you keep score of all those electrons and molecules running plays as they assemble carbohydrates in the light-independent stage of photosynthesis.
That would be great, JJ.
Now, remember how Johnny Spectrum was saying that in the light-dependent reactions, ATP and NADPH were formed? And remember that the overall equation for photosynthesis shows carbon dioxide as reactant. Well, when you see how it all comes together, you're going to think you're watching a highlight reel. Talk about the play of the game. Anyway, let's look at the players in the sugar-making game, the synthesis part of photosynthesis, the light-independent reactions. The lineup includes several important molecules. The ATP delivers energy, the NADPH delivers hydrogen and electrons, and carbon dioxide provides the carbon and oxygen. The light-dependent reaction kicks off with a big offensive play, the capture of carbon dioxide called carbon dioxide fixation. A 5-carbon molecule called RUBP sacks a carbon dioxide molecule and steals its carbon atom. The product is a 6-carbon, rather unstable intermediate. This starts a cyclic pathway that yields sugar phosphates and regenerates the RUBP. Like all great plays, it has a name, the Calvin-Benson cycle. Let's follow the carbon atoms as they run the play. Carbon from the air diffuses across the plasma membrane into the stroma of the chloroplast. The carbon then attaches to the RUBP. This newly formed unstable molecule quickly splits into 2 3-carbon molecules called phosphoglycerate, or PGA. The ATP donates phosphate and NADPH hands off hydrogen and electrons to turn each PGA to phosphoglyceraldehyde, or PGAL. The play is run 6 times. Then most of the PGAL gets converted to RUBP, but 2 PGALs combine to make a 6-carbon sugar phosphate. Touchdown! The sugar phosphate end product is why photosynthesis takes place. This is the molecule that gets converted into food, like sucrose, starch, and cellulose. Wow, what an amazing game! The Calvin-Benson cycle is a must in any photosynthesizing playbook.
Thanks for your enthusiastic report, JJ. Let's recap briefly some of today's important stories.
We began, Laura, by noting that photosynthesis is a process which food is synthesized using light energy. We also looked at the chemical equation for photosynthesis.
Right. The equation shows us that sunlight helps to transform water and carbon dioxide into the products of photosynthesis, glucose and oxygen. These feed the plants and give us the air to breathe.
Next, we learned that all photosynthesizing plants, even tiny bacteria and protistans, are autotrophs, which means they produce their own food.
Right. And organisms that are nourished by other organisms, such as people, animals, fungi, and most bacteria, are called heterotrophs.
We also took a look inside a leaf and saw the mesophyll, where most of the photosynthesizing takes place.
Right. Susie Skyview also showed us that inside the mesophyll are numerous photosynthetic cells, and inside those cells are chloroplasts, the organelle of photosynthesis.
We also saw that within the photosynthetic cell, two types of reactions occur. Light-dependent reactions precede an intricate membrane system called the thylakoid membrane system.
And light-independent reactions proceed within the stroma.
We learned so much today, Laura. We learned that the chlorophyll is a green pigment within the chloroplast, and those red, orange, and yellow pigments are called carotenoids.
And that's important because the chemical equation showed us it takes sunlight and chlorophyll to promote photosynthesis.
Remember also that Johnny Spectrum talked about two types of light-dependent reactions, the cyclic pathway and the non-cyclic pathway.
And of course, J.J. Carboni's personal favorite, the Calvin-Benson cycle, which is how sugar is synthesized through a light-independent reaction.
That's it for Science News today. I think we've shown that photosynthesis is an incredible process that we cannot be without. I'm glad we had a chance to find out all about it.
We've presented you with a one-of-a-kind news story.
Hey, we may get the Emmy for this one.
I hope so. I'll say one thing, I have a newfound respect for that salad and corn when it gets placed on my dinner table tonight. I'm Laura Plast.
And I'm Kevin Leaf. We hope you all have a sunny photosynthesizing day.
Thanks, Laura. I'm here like that in the middle of a sunny day.
Let's start by taking a look at the chemical equation for this process.
So I have something in common with a mushroom. We're both heterotrophs.
Oops.
With pigments in them, you know, like chlorophyll.
We learned so much, Laura. We learned that the green... and those red, orange, and yellow pigments, well, they're called carotenoids.
And as far as the weather's concerned, there's not much more to say. All over the world, you can see that there are just storms everywhere. It's a storm coming, and you're not going to get away from it. You're going to be wet. Watch it. Watch this.
So what it looks like we're in the lab.
3, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7.
You've got a point there, JJ. It's all English to me. We learned that chlorophyll is a green pigment within the chloroplasts. We learned so much, Laura. We learned that Did you? All right. Great job.